I have questioned what is in front of my eyes my whole life. Not so ideal for my parents and those attempting to direct me into a reasonable, content existence, but what can I say? I have just the right amount of strengths and self-management skills to sneak under the radar, and just enough campaigner and rebel to cause a ruckus. What I have never questioned is what I see without my eyes, a deeper understanding of the wisdom and flow of life that is happening beyond the rat race, a depth without borders, a depth outside of the box. I am here in these words projecting out of your speakers to shine a light on a different idea, to spread seeds of possibility, to offer balance and disruption, to adjust the camera towards the kinks and shadows of ourselves, and to appreciate every nook and crevice of our existence. I am offering this podcast as a collaborative experiment with life, a journey of freedom making and change shaking, a new way that starts within you.
Big for me is, which it's for lots of things, not just death, but grieving and allowing grief. And that between losing my 2 dogs, and that's something I know the center gave me, is the ability to grieve, to let the emotion out.
Mm-hmm. And also that people don't talk about death until it's right up at them when they're traumatized, instead of having a plan ahead so that all the people who are left behind have got like a plan and they know what the person wants. So they're not guessing when they're in a traumatized state and arguing with each other.
How grief phobic our culture is. And I still struggle to cry.
Welcome back to Freedom Frequencies, everyone out there in audio land. I trust you are doing well. Life circumstances directed this podcast today, as 2 months ago I was delivered the sad news that my best friend, fur baby, adventure companion of 12 years had lymphoma, with an undetermined amount of time left on this planet. Within 6 weeks of this diagnosis, she was gone from this earthly plane. I have cried and grieved a lot these few months. So much so that I constantly wonder if more tears are even possible, but yet here they are. In any case, thank you for being witness to this process for me. Actually, in the time of this recording, Cedar was still with me and taking part in my work days and podcasts, so she blesses us with her presence and sounds throughout this episode. Aren't we lucky? The whole journey from Cedar's suspect seeming injury to diagnosis was heartbreaking, to say the least, and also a learning for me, as it hit so close to the heart, and at the same time I was the one responsible for this life. I have lost close family and friends in my life thus far, and had unique and beautiful experiences in each of them, always contemplating what life is about and how I feel about death and what I am grateful for. And this time, an even deeper realization of what's important to me and what I want to do with this time. More than ever, I have discovered that I want to take death out of the list of bad things in life and see it through the lens of being equally a part of life, just as birth is. All this had me thinking about the fact that I have some people in my circle of life that work in this field. What field, you ask? Why, the death field. So today I'm sharing with you my sit down with 2 of them and the conversation that we shared around this topic. Missy Christensen is the founder of All Stages Life Solutions. She is a licensed science of mind practitioner, a personal life and death coach, and ritual officiant and workshop leader, dedicated to inspiring people towards an experience of the magic that is available to them, whatever stage they find themselves at. And Sue Ellen McDonald is co-leader of the Death Dialogues here in Campbell River and an end-of-life advocate and educator. I am so grateful for the amazing and unique people that the center brings into my life. So let's dive in. Thank you, ladies, both for being here. What I wanted to start by diving into with you two was how you got started down this road, or what brought you to a place of wanting to work with death, and seeing as how we're in a culture where that is something we often shove into the deep dark corners of our lives, of our worlds, of our thoughts, don't really want to deal with, and here you are at the helm of let's talk about and work with dying.
I really didn't know much about death at all. I'd lost some relatives I wasn't close to, and went through a trauma of losing a beloved, very connected dog. And then in probably 5 years, experienced the death of a close friend, my mom, my dad, and my dog and my cat. So I felt relatively lucky that I was in my 40s and had not experienced the death of anyone close to me. And then what surprised me was how I felt, particularly with my parents. I felt like nobody else had done this before, and that my brothers and I were just figuring it out, like bumbling along, figuring it out. And I was like, everybody's done this before. So why do we not talk about it? And why do we not have other people's experience to draw from to help us know what to expect or have an idea? Just like people talk about, their birth experiences. Why don't people talk about their death experiences?
Yeah. Well, I, in my early 30s, almost died. So for me, I definitely had an experience of being in the medical system and having to face how much resources I was using up, and the fact that I wasn't getting better faster, and just this idea of, what is the point of me being alive, and how do I haven't been a person who's been used to just taking resources and people's time and people's energy when I didn't have the energy to give back anything. So it just sent me in this whole kind of existential thing of like, what does it even mean to be alive? And from there, I had this sort of moment where I was like, yeah, I'm not actually supposed to die. And so something changed in me, and I began to find out about the body-mind connection and all that sort of thing. But it really gave me a personal idea of what it is to, be that close to death, and also to be in a medicalized system. And I was on the leukemia ward, and there was a friend of mine who was there as well that I'd made friends with because we were there getting blood transfusions and whatnot. And she had taken a ton of meds, and at one point she just decided, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to let my disease take its turn. And so she decided to die, but to die with dignity and not die in a totally medicalized sort of haze without feeling the life at the end of her life. And that was the first time I saw somebody who chose to live fully in death, in the process of dying. And it was the most profound, I'm actually tearing up thinking about it, profoundly beautiful thing I'd ever experienced. Because she rallied her friends and family around her, and they all took turns helping her. And as she, her body condition changed, they were all there, and they all then had this incredible connection with her. So when I went to her celebration of life, she'd helped to plan it. They all knew each other where they hadn't known each other before. Her life and her world was so much more connected than it had ever been in life, than mine had ever been. And so that was the first time that I really saw, like, death is a part of life. And it's this beautiful journey that you can go on if you choose to embrace it and include other people in it and talk about it and share it, and everyone can laugh together and cry together. And so yes, everyone mourned the end of her, and yet she lived on so much more fully in accepting her death and sharing it before she actually transitioned into another form. So yeah, that really was the beginning of it. And then I've since then had a lot of experience with elders that I've been the advocate with them through, and then I've helped friends, elders as well. And so it just became something that I also saw the people that were in the death professions, the people at the funeral homes and stuff, the tools that they gave us that were so helpful, that helped us move through things, or the counseling programs, or the walking programs, or whatever. So it really solidified for me how important it is to talk about death before and after.
Yes, for
and
sure.
during.
And during, yes. So what I know, what I've heard, and what I know from both of you is that you've been there, to the end of this bodily physical form with people. I imagine that that's not all that end of life advocates do for people. So what kind of, like, if you're out there in the world and you have no idea what an advocate, an educator of end of life work is, or what death and dying is, or what death dialogues are, or death cafes, like, what kind of things do you actually do in the world?
So to me, there's two different kinds of advocacy, I guess. And one is really being there with the person who is going through the process of dying. And that can include the family as well. So helping people to make sense of it. And, some people have a really strong spiritual practice, some people don't. So they've got nothing to kind of give it a context around. Give it any kind of ritual around, give it any kind of meaning around. So it's about opening those kinds of conversations, and also allowing really the person who is dying to have their needs met. So if they have fears, to allow them to be expressed, if they have specific wishes that they want to have brought forward and they can't speak for themselves, to make sure that those are followed, to make sure that they're kept comfortable and as part of the conversation. Because my experience has been that sometimes when the person, especially if they're an elder, can't speak for themselves, all of the questions from medical professionals, for instance, will go towards whoever the caretakers are. And that person, even though they're still alive and they still are functioning and listening, and they're not taken into consideration. And so it's really about making sure that person is centered in the process, but also that family are given space to grieve or say what their needs are, so that everybody's sort of held through a process that can be kind of discombobulating and scary and whatever else, and to really allow people to live until they are actually on to the next realm, and to allow them to speak what they need to speak in order to come to peace. So that's one kind of advocacy. The other kind of advocacy is letting people know what tools are available to, what sorts of forms are available for you to write down where your wishes are, and what types of agreements can be put in place, and what are some things that can be done ahead of time so that the process after you're gone is easier for everybody left behind, and so that your wishes are followed, and how to deal with making funeral plans and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree, Missy, with you said early on, like, it's all about opening conversations, and that's for me kind of the whole scope of it, right? Is everything from what I first said, with feeling just more comfortable to talk about death, that it's part of our day-to-day conversation. It's not this big ominous thing that you don't know how to talk about or broach with somebody. And it's, yeah, again, as Missy said, so important to know somebody's wishes. And I know for me, the difference I saw in being with both my mom and my dad in their dying is my dad's was shorter, easier in some ways, but it was so much more stressful for me because I had no idea what he wanted. No idea. And so when he couldn't communicate that anymore, nobody knew what he wanted because we'd never talked about it. And that just caused so much more stress for me. Yeah, so there's things like Death Cafe or Death Dialogues. There's lots of different services where people can go to become more comfortable about death. So there's that end of just learning to talk about it more comfortably, and recently ran an end of life planning working group with some friends. And just like Missy said again too, just knowing the tools, and there are in our culture, not surprisingly, there's lots of paperwork and options and things that can seem really hard to navigate through when you are in a grieving state. So to have some of those tools done or taken care of before you or someone close to you dies, to have made some of those decisions ahead of time. And then I've taken a death doula course, which is, a lot of people don't even know what that is. And it's someone who can help you do the planning. It's also someone who can sit by the bedside. Some people can't. I saw that in my family. Some people just physically, like mentally, just emotionally can't be with the person when they're actively dying. It's very difficult for some people, and other people find that even peaceful to be sitting there and just holding space for the person while they're going through whatever process they need to go through.
The little bit that I understand about death dialogues is, as far as in a public community event that has happened in the past, is that it seems to be less the people that are actually, in their dying days, and more the people who are maybe dealing with that, or maybe just interested in opening up those conversations in a bigger way. Right now in the world, this is kind of relatively new in our culture. What kind of people do you guys see taking part in it?
I'd say from what I've seen with our Death Cafe and Death Dialogue meetings and workshops that have happened, it's a full range of people, and more people who are either, a lot of people who are working as nurses or care aides and want to help people who are closer to dying to die well. And then it seems like a lot of the other people are either people who've experienced a recent death, or just people who are curious and realize that I don't know anything.
And there's a lot of new old ways of dealing with death. That I think the more that people are getting more spiritual kind of in general in their lives, they're looking for non-traditional, I'm going to say non-traditional maybe in terms of the way that churches have dealt with stuff, but it's actually quite traditional in terms of what people did before there was organized places that you went. But people are really interested in, and with the earth, concerns about the environment and whatnot, people are really looking to how can I make plans for myself that are going to be environmentally responsible and those kinds of things. There's definitely interest in that sort of thing as people start to look at that. And we have an aging population, so anybody who's interested in having those kinds of conversations, I think, gets interested about it. Yeah. And also, in order to create space in our lives, sure, we want to, downsize things so there isn't a whole bunch of stuff left to deal with before we go. But that's also about how can I create space for myself to be able to live. Mm-hmm. And so if I have kind of unfinished business or things that I feel like, well, if something happened to me, people wouldn't know where my passwords are, and people wouldn't know that I don't know how to organize all of that stuff. That's also something that you can do and come and talk about. Like, what are some ways that I can make myself prepared to die in order to be able to live, mm-hmm. because there's nothing standing in my way anymore. Mm-hmm. It takes away that fear of death because it demystifies it, and it also allows you to be prepared in a way that, okay, bring it on. I can do whatever I want to in my life now because I got it all dialed in for the end. There's nothing to be afraid of.
Yeah. Undo the tethers. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating, the piece about the environmentally friendly ways to die. Being that I love the planet, I'm like really curious right now. What are environmentally friendly deaths?
Well, there's this whole composting thing that's happening now, where you're not necessarily burning someone, so that obviously that's going to release a bunch of fuel and whatnot into the air, and you're also not putting them in this kind of hermetically sealed box that's got all kinds of lacquer and stuff on it, and you're not putting all kinds of chemicals into their bodies to preserve them. You're really allowing them, to return to dust, as so that as I've been nourished through my life by that which comes from the land, I then release myself back to the land to nourish the land. It's like a gift that you give at the end.
Yeah, actually, it's something people don't realize about cremation. That's essentially like driving across Canada. to burn your body, the fuel that's used.
Wow.
Yeah, and we have green burial in Campbell River now, which is pretty exciting. And there's like you can make your own caskets. People don't know that. And there's actually a do-it-yourself casket company out of Royston that are selling at the farmers markets now, which is really cool. Yeah, there's a lot of alternate ways now to, which isn't the dying per se, it's the death, like to deal with our bodies.
What's a green burial?
A green burial is, there's a few different kinds, but it's where you're buried in a biodegradable casket or shroud, something minimal that is not going to persist in the earth. So then you're also not embalmed or anything that's chemicals for the earth. And then some, like here, you're in a plot, but then they let that land return. They'll replant it with like salal and trees and stuff. And so there's a section of land you'll be like GPSed where your body is, but there's not this mowed piece of lawn with a headstone, and you return back to the forest. Some places, not the one here, even allow after 25 years, once your body's decomposed, that someone else could be buried on top of you. There's different styles of green burial.
Definitely interesting conversation to open. I can imagine that would bring up stuff for people who maybe, like you said, traditionally, have been doing it one way, and there's a lot of stigma around that one way. So presenting all these new ways, even just what you just walked through, I could imagine that like a lot of that brings up comfort levels. I was thinking about the cultures in the world that celebrate death in a completely different way than our culture does, and how I was imagining that it would paint a different feeling around comfort, around death and dying, right? And so you two have been immersed in this field for some time now. How would you describe your own comfort levels?
I'd say I'm pretty comfortable with it. I mean, I've always had a bit of a darker edge where I collect skulls, not real ones. Well, I used to collect animal skulls, but I've always been fascinated by what's left behind, and skulls in particular, because to me that's the place where the eyes were. It's the place where the brain lives. Like, it's so much of how we communicate when we're alive is through that form. And so I've always been fascinated by cultures that, bead skulls after death, and, the different ways that people have taken that form of what's left behind. So yeah, I've always been interested in death and the different ways that go about it. And now, I mean, there's these crazy things, like some people, after you're cremated, you can have your ashes turned into marbles. So if people don't want to have ashes sitting there, they can have a little bowl of marbles, or everybody in the family gets a marble. Like, there's so many different ways, some of which are kind of playful and interesting. And then, I sat at my mother's deathbed and at my father's, but my mom died at home and my dad died in a hospital. And so I've had those two different experiences as a family member going through that. And because I've had to come to terms with death myself, I think I'm pretty comfortable with it. But I'm really glad to have had people to shepherd me along the way, which is why I think it's so important to have these conversations.
I did meet somebody a couple of years ago who was in the line of work of putting ashes into blown glass, like necklaces or pendant, style stuff. Anyway, Sue Ellen, where's your comfort level at?
I would say I never had to face death very much, but I never felt uncomfortable with it. I worked at a vet clinic in my 20s and had no problem emptying the freezer and doing some things around death. And then, with my mom, I realized I had the ability to be there and to face it and wasn't uncomfortable with it. And I also was inspired by my friend who passed away before my mom, to see how with such strength and grace he faced his death, and that somehow him and his wife, and I asked his wife this after, I said, somehow I saw the two of you never give up hope, never stop fighting the cancer, but prepare to die at the same time. And I said, I don't know how you walked that line, that you never gave up hope and you prepared for his death. Mm-hmm. And I think, like what Missy said earlier, like, when you are prepared, you can lose the fear. And I just saw them face stuff with such beauty. And I was like, I want I wanted to give my mom that. Like, so wanted to give her that. And it was her journey. I couldn't. But so yeah, not be scared of it. I do, through my end of life working group, I realized, well, I may be comfortable with death. And actually, it's funny to hear Missy say she collected skulls, because I have a whole bunch of the biologist in me, but yeah, I have a lot of animal skulls. But in my end of life working group, I realized I do have some uncomfort in facing my own death. Some of it's just a feeling of not wanting to burden people with things like having to ask someone to be my medical representative if I can't speak for myself. Like, oh, that seems so huge to ask somebody. So yeah, I was really having to face, like, why am I not doing my own end of life planning? And some of it is that, some personal discomfort, but not, I guess it's not so much around the actual dying, but around the whole
process
and what you have to do and talk about, and
responsibilities.
Yeah. And fear of making other people uncomfortable, right? Like, oh, I got to go talk to my brothers about what my wishes might be. And I know they're going to be like, bleh. So yeah, some discomfort around death and making other people uncomfortable, and facing my own.
And that, to me, is part of the reason why it's great to have an advocate or a practitioner. Like, as a practitioner, part of my, and this, Colette, part of my work in becoming a practitioner was to have to write my own eulogy. So really have to come face to face with death, and to look at books on dying, and to really learn about how it used to be, again, in the medical system, where dying people it was like, oh, they probably just want to be left alone, and so then these poor people that are still, they got things to say and stuff that they want to share and stuff that's coming up for them, because my experience is, like, a lot of clarity will come to you at the end of your life. There was nobody speaking to them. So to be able to have someone who has kind of an open spiritual bent, I guess, so that people can ask those questions and talk about those things in life that are stopping them from, like, those feelings of, as Sue was saying, of burdening people, so that if you open the conversation now, you can come to peace with some of those things in your life that makes you feel like you're not enough to ask for that. The first law of thermodynamics, where energy within an enclosed loop can't be dissipated, it can only change form. And so that's the way that I look at life. It's like we're in this enclosed loop of life, and that energy changes, so you're not in this flesh form anymore, but your energy hasn't gone anywhere. That energy still exists, and all of us hold a piece of the people that we leave behind, or the animals that we hold. That's part of our life mosaic. It's part of what we know. It's part of what we move forward with and what we come to other people with. So to be able to dive into that and begin to see some of the beauty of it and the gift of sharing it is kind of a cool thing to do while you're alive. It takes away a lot of the angst.
Yeah, sharing it does take away a lot of the angst. And that idea I said earlier too, about people share their birth stories. And I find it a bit funny that a woman will announce she's pregnant and people feel comfortable to share, like, their horrifying birth stories, right? Like, oh my God, I was in labor for 3 days. And like, like, they kind of, share scary stories, but yet we never talk about our death experiences. Like, my mom was 13 days in that comatose. I didn't even know a body could go without food or water for 13 days. My mom was stubborn. And just would have been nice to know stuff like that. And yeah, everybody's death story is going to be different, just like everybody's birth story, but it gives you some knowledge to grow on. Like,
yeah, and then you kind of know what to expect too.
Well, like you said, the livingness, the part where you are still living up until that moment, is the part there's so much value into doing the way you want to do. Really simply put, what do you think the benefits are? Maybe from your own, what they have been for you, or maybe what you've seen in working with other people. What do you think the benefits are to opening up to doing this life and death thing differently?
Just reduce stress and anxiety. And I even believe again, the difference between my friends dying, I think he was so prepared that his spirit, he chose when to go. He didn't do MAID.
Mm-hmm.
He'd had enough of pain relief and stuff, and his spirit was done and he passed. And whereas I do feel like with my mom, she was, I don't know if she was fighting something or she had to get like, she had to go through her journey to get to the place where she could leave. And I do believe my friend had consciously done that journey already. So I think to, yeah, reduce that fear and anxiety, both for the person dying and the family, and to have a good death.
Yeah. I think facing dying allows you to live.
Can I read this quote that I remembered when we were talking and I pulled it up?
Mm-hmm.
It's by a fellow named Harvey Max Chochinov. Whenever my plane takes off, I always think about how air travel is the perfect metaphor for life and death. The moment we are born, our lives take flight. Some people remain airborne longer than others. Some run into more turbulence than others. Yet, most people are so engaged in the journey, they ignore the fact that landings are inevitable. Working in palliative care, I can assure you there is a world of difference between a good and gentle landing as opposed to just crash and burn. In our aversion to death, we are like the airline passenger who only wants to think about the free food and the complimentary drinks, check out what movies are available, and periodically look out the window and enjoy the view. Focusing on the flight lets us shut out the reality that the ground we see off in the far distance is ground each and every one of us, without exception, must inevitably return to. Not acknowledging death does not make it go away, any more than talking about it will somehow hasten its arrival. Who doesn't want a gentle landing as life itself comes to a complete and final stop?
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Yes.
Gentle landing, sign me up. What are some of the common stigmas that you guys run into? Like you said, the idea that dying hurts might be one, right? That it's painful. Because it's scary, so it must be painful, is probably what's going on in the undercurrent of that.
And I think what Sue said too about, I'm going to burden people somehow if I involve them in my death. And there's this huge desire to not be a burden. And so some people will actually start planning for death, like stop living. Like my mother refused to put pictures up on the wall in her new apartment when she downsized from her detached home into an apartment because, well, I'm not going to be here very long. Well, she was there for 10 years. That's 10 years of your life that you have pictures on your wall because you're dying. Come on.
It's very insightful to me. I think that my dad's like that. I think he is talking prematurely about leaving this world because he always has a story that he doesn't want to burden or bother or disrupt anybody's life, you know? Yeah. And I'm like looking at him going like, Dad, you're like 62 and you're like healthy as an ox.
Yeah.
Like, you should probably make some plans for life.
Get another 40 years or 30 years. Like another half of your life still to live.
I've just, a lot of fear. Again, I think it's just that lack of our culture. We really don't know much about it, and not knowing how to deal with grief, and then anger, like lots of anger. I think people feel because of the uncertainty.
Probably beliefs play a role, like theological beliefs,
for sure. Yeah,
in whatever comes up as a stigma for people.
Yeah, like I know for my mom, there was a sense that if we talked about death, it was macabre. It was morbid. You're dealing with morbidity, and it's unpleasant in some way. It's impolite, off-putting for people. That's really coming at it from this perspective of death is something that we avoid and something that is painful and that is something that is other, as opposed to it just being part of a natural process and something that can be beautiful. And every death that I've been a part of has been this incredible gift of it's allowed me to be so grateful for the life that I still have. It's allowed me to be amazed at what someone can pack into a life. It's been amazing for me to see the difference between someone who chooses to let go and release and go into it, and the incredible insights that can come to them at the end because they've got nothing left to prove anymore. They don't need to hold up any social standing or whatever. They can just tell the truth. And those people that are still so trapped in an idea of what they should be, that can't let go, and the discomfort that that can bring to them, like all of that's been huge life lessons. So that's been like, it's been nothing but a gift to go through that with people. And facing my own death has also made me like so much more aware of the things that there are to be grateful for in life, and the value of the people to just help me learn who's able to handle certain things and who can't handle other things. And it's all just been super useful. There's a way to talk about it and make peace with it that doesn't have to be stigmatizing.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about talking to kids about death and dying?
Yes, they're probably more comfortable than us about death. I know the neighbor's little girl who I think she was my last dog, Luca. I think she was his, I don't know, soulmate, or his, like, definitely they were very connected for some reason. And she just said when he was dying, she came and said goodbye, and she said something about, "You're off to your next adventure. I hope someone throws sticks for you there." And I was like, look at that. She's like 7 and she knows he's going to his next adventure.
Cute.
I think it's like kids know. Obviously, if someone is not showing up anymore, it's like, oh, what happened to so-and-so? But obviously, they also know. And so the more we hide it, the more we stigmatize it for them, the more we make it this scary thing that they're not allowed to talk about. And then they fear it. Whereas, obviously you have to talk to kids in an age-appropriate way. So if you start putting a lot of heavy technical stuff on people who are too little to understand it. But yeah, like kids can understand, hope somebody gives you a bone in the next go round, and they're so in tune with the possibility that there's any number of worlds happening at once, right? And imaginary friends and whatever. They don't see the same kind of finite existence that adults have learned to. So they're more than happy to enter into a story that you tell about it that's life affirming, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess they pick up on whatever we're leading the way with as far as death goes anyway. We might as well have enlightening conversations. I'm just going to pause this for one moment to fix my dog. Come here, Cedar. Lay down. Lay down. Yes, you're a good girl. Lay down. Lay down. Stay. Little chomper.
With the talking about kids too, like just not just the actual stuff of death, but as far as like funerals and things, I heard some really good advice from Stephen Garrett, who's a death educator, grief counselor. Some advice he gave a friend of mine whose mother, her young children's grandmother, passed away quite quickly, and she didn't want to take the kids to the funeral because it was very Catholic and Black and traditional, and like her culture, there was going to be lots of wailing, and she found it really disturbing. And she's like, I don't know if I want to take my kids, and everyone's telling me they have to wear black, and I don't want them wearing black. And I mean, not only did he give her advice, like, do what you need to do for your family, but I really liked, he said, tell the kids in detail what they're walking into. Set them up for success in this funeral. Like, instead of not talking about it and all of a sudden they're in this situation, to talk like, we're going to go to this church and there's going to be a casket up in the front and your grandma will be in that casket and people will be wailing and wearing black, and then tell them what they can and can't do. And like he said things too, like arrange that if it's too much for them, that maybe someone could take them out if they wanted to go out. And but I just thought that was such good advice to like give them a lot of detail about what they're walking into. Yeah.
That makes so much sense to me. It's like all of this just speaks to taking it out of the shadows. It doesn't have to be there. Why is it there? Celebrate it. Like birth.
Well, and that's when we find out the most about people too, right? Births, deaths, and marriages. right? That this like a baby gets born and then suddenly we learn all about the family and the family comes together, and marriages, you're telling stories about this side of the family and that side of the family, and deaths, it's this time to come together for storytelling, and it's actually a time to like know and realize the love. It's a time to practice love. And you can do that on the journey there too. We feel like we can only do it after, but there's actually a lot of opportunity. I think also maybe we're in a society where intimacy can be scary for people, that we're told that we have to kind of keep a stiff upper lip, or that we're supposed to be some kind of way. And so unedited emotion is something that can be frightening for people, because they think that, well, if I start crying, I'm never going to stop. But in reality, that's not what the truth is. And so again, the more you can bring that to a place where people get that release and allow those things to move through them, then the less there's going to be that anger afterwards, or that crash that you go through where you're, totally anxious and can't get out of bed for ages afterwards. You can just have clean grief, where you miss somebody or something, but you're allowed to feel it all the way through.
And to think of that grief, the grief is just the love, right? It's just the love you have for that person. It's that grief and gratitude, grief and love, two sides of the same coin. And I think, Missy, you said people saying something about scared that they're going to grieve and never return or whatever. And that's funny, because I just read a chapter in a book that's really beautiful called The Wild Edge of Sorrow. And I just read it this morning, and he said that people say to him, like, I'm scared to grieve that I'll never return. And he says, if you don't go there, you'll never return.
Absolutely.
Totally. I found myself a number of times lately, I think I said it to you, that crying multiple times a day for days in a row and for days in a row and for weeks in a row, and going like, oh my gosh, do these tears ever run out? Like, where am I dehydrated? No, it's an infinite wellspring of love, of deep love. Yeah. It's never ever going. It could never run out. But feeling my way all the way through it has been so valuable, and it lightens the load, because suddenly it's not the heaviness of grief; it's the lightness of love. Each time it happens, it's just like it's an outpouring of that deep, loving feeling. So, a couple questions more before we wrap it up. There must be, I mean, maybe this is speaking from my world of wellness, there must be a way in which self-care is super important for people like yourselves that are working in this realm. What's most important for you as somebody that is holding space for people in one of the hardest times of their existence?
In any given situation, you can choose to focus on that which feels dark and difficult, or you can choose to focus on the amazing things that are happening. I definitely find it a lot more challenging to feel well when I'm with someone who's in the hospital, because all the flurry and the beeping and the people who are in the room with you that are groaning and moaning, and so there it's just really important to move around, to get outside, to get fresh air, to reconnect to things that are alive, that smell beautiful, the sunshine, the trees, the grass, like going out and literally grounding, so that all of that kind of madness and sort of electrical energy that you sort of pick up in a hospital environment can be placed on the ground. But I think for me, no matter where I am, that focusing on the good, focusing on the good that's being done, focusing on the comfort that the person has in the fact that you're there, focusing on the amazing courage and grace of the person who's moving through, like that to me is a huge help.
That makes sense. Let it be something that energizes you as opposed to drains you. It just reminded me of all the times that when my grandpa was in the hospice, that in the end of his life, that he wasn't technically supposed to leave the building, and he wouldn't be possibly able to on his own, but whether it was the chair or the bed, I constantly was escaping and wheeling him out into the world.
Yeah. Live until you're
we
not
need to
alive.
Get out of here. What about you, Sue Ellen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely walks in nature. That's huge for me, to get outside. And yeah, one of my really good memories with my dad is less than a week before he died. I had taken him out for a walk in the wheelchair out to beside the river, and we'd pet some dogs and and then eating food that's cooked with love, and whether that be cooked by yourself or cooked by someone else.
It's also, I think, really important to allow the people who want to help. Like, I remember when I was sick, my mother didn't want the neighbors to know. And I thought, why? They'll bring us casseroles. Like, why wouldn't we let them know? It's not shameful to be going through this. It's not shameful to have emotions. It's not shameful to need something. And my experience is that people want something to do. Please let me help. They don't know what to do. They maybe won't be able to come and sit and talk to you, but they want to mow your lawn, or they want to bring you the casserole. Like, let me do something, but within my comfort zone. And I remember when my mom was dying, I'm not very good at accepting help from other people. And I had a group of female friends who all showed up at the house one day. And I'm just laughing because the dog is here. There's life in action, eh? But yeah, this group of female friends who showed up at the house one day, and they did exactly what you said, Sue. They brought food, and one of them said, I'm going to hold your mother's hand. And an old version of me never would have let that happen. I would have thought that I had to kind of keep it together, and I'm very glad to, again, have gone through a bit of a spiritual growth so that it allowed me to open to the love that's being offered me. And I had this moment of kind of transcendence where I sat in this room and I was just like, this death has brought so much life to this space. Because someone was in with my mom holding her hand, and somebody else was like fluffing her pillows and doing the sheets, and somebody else was in making a sandwich, and somebody else was making tea, and somebody else was taking out the garbage. And it was just like, I felt like I transformed into like another time where all the women folk came together and just took care. And I was profoundly grateful and so moved, and it lifted so much weight from me.
Yeah, I'd say allow other people in and try and get past that. Like you said, got to do it on your own and ask for help. Because like you said, people want to help.
I know that you've both spoken to it a lot throughout, but to close, if there was a way to summarize for yourself what you personally, deeply, what you want to see happen for death in our world.
I just want to see people be comfortable with it.
Yeah, to have it be demystified and have it be something that is as much a part of life as life. And for people to be able to live right until the moment that they die.
I believe that biologically is what we're designed for. To live until we die.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between being alive and living, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of unnecessary angst and arguing and whatnot, that if we could just make peace with the fact that, the minute we're born, the death thing is on the table. I mean, there's some beautiful rituals in some cultures, like I think it's in the Jewish culture where they wash the body afterwards. And there are these wonderful things that you can be a part of that allow you the processing time and the clearing. Like, I remember when I left my mother's apartment finally, I just cleaned every corner of it and touched every corner of it. And as I did that, I thought about the family that had gone on here, the life that had been a part of this space. And I thanked the space and for being the container for my mother's life, and just go through that ritual, and for people to find their rituals that are meaningful to them. I think we live in a world where we don't necessarily all share the same rituals in the way that maybe at one time there was more of a homogenized, these religions were at place in this culture and this is the way we did these things. And now some people don't have anything that they can ritualize. So for them to be able to own the process so that they can have the release that comes with diving in.
Mm-hmm.
I for sure felt that. For me, that felt like a struggle, not having a religious background or anything that had rituals behind it, that I didn't know I had a need for ritual, and then having to create ritual myself, like, again, felt like I was doing this alone, right? Like, just having to figure out some ritual around my parents. So yeah, I agree with the finding something that works for you, and hopefully having people who talk about it so it's easier to find.
Well, thank you, ladies, for being a couple of those beacons in the world for people. And thank you for this time today. I think it's been awesome and wonderful. And I think many people are going to learn much from it.
Yay!
So thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm officially past this Billy Dog's dinner time. So
Yeah, I can say Cedar's like, come on, be done. She looks so cute to me. She's like this little gopher head popping up.
Hey, what about me?
it's 15 minutes after my dinner time. So thank you. And yeah, that was great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. I'm so happy to get to see Cedar.